I was a dead man walking in the death row camp. Li Dao, you committed an unforgivable crime against your superiors. If the princess hadn't spoken up, you would have been executed today. Don't blame me. Her Highness wanted you to live, but the Emperor refused. This camp will be your final resting place. From now on, your name is gone. Your number is 9527. You are nothing but a body waiting for the grave. Those words echoed in my mind as I jolted awake. I sat up fast, gasping for air, my forehead drenched in cold sweat. I looked around. The space was dim and damp. I was trapped in a wooden cage, and the air stank of a nauseating, metallic rot. I looked down at myself. My hair was a matted mess. I was covered in bruises and scrapes, wearing nothing but a tattered white tunic. On my chest, the word prisoner was written in bold ink. If I could see my back, I knew the word death was branded there. I was a death row inmate in the most notorious place in the world. I scanned the dark corners of the cell and saw other shadows moving, men dressed just like me. I sighed to myself. It had been a month. I had to face the reality that I had truly been reborn into this world. I didn't want to accept it, but facts were facts. My downfall could be summed up in 8 words. Too much wine, too much lust. A month ago, the great Qian imperial family held a palace banquet. In this life, I was a third-class earl, so I was on the guest list. During the feast, I developed a splitting headache. I didn't dare leave while the emperor was speaking, so I tried to drown the pain in alcohol. It didn't help. By the time the feast actually started, I wasn't just in pain, I was blackout drunk. I stumbled away from the table to find some air and wandered into a secluded palace. When I pushed the doors open, I froze. My eyes met a vision of pure white. A woman stood there, breathtakingly beautiful with a figure that could melt a man's soul. In that exact moment, my headache vanished. The memories of my previous life flooded back all at once. The combination of the alcohol and the mental shock of regaining my past memories broke my restraint. I lost control. I ruined her innocence. When I finally came to my senses, the imperial guards had me pinned to the floor in front of the emperor. That's when I learned who she was, Princess manhwa. She was the most prestigious woman in the dynasty after the empress and the emperor's favorite daughter. I still remember the emperor's face. He was beyond livid. He wanted to execute my entire extended family and have me sliced into pieces. But then, the very woman I had wronged, Princess manhwa, opened her mouth and asked for my life to be spared. The emperor couldn't go back on his word, but he still wanted me dead. He didn't send me to the capital prison. Instead, he sent me here, to the death row camp on the northern border. This place borders the northern barbarian territories. Skirmishes happen every day. Lately, things have been heating up, and a full-scale war is looming. Even regular soldiers here live every day like it's their last. For a prisoner like me, being sent here was a death sentence in disguise. But did I really want to die? I had just been reborn. It wasn't easy getting a second chance at life. Food. It's time to eat. A shout from outside the cell broke my trance. The silent room suddenly erupted into chaos. Give me food. I'm starving. Get out of my way. Move, or I'll kill you. Kill me? We're all on death row. Who are you trying to scare? Footsteps approached. A few guards in military gear walked in carrying wooden buckets. One of them slammed a wooden ladle against the bars. Shut up and line up. One by one. Anyone who makes noise doesn't eat. The cell went dead silent. These men knew the guards weren't joking. In this era, death row inmates had no rights. If a guard beat you to death, the most punishment he'd get was a day of solitary confinement. Our lives were worth less than dirt. I picked up my small bowl and joined the line. If I wanted to live, I had to eat. I had to take it one step at a time. When I reached the front, I received a scoop of clear water and a piece of grayish-yellow flatbread the size of my palm. That was it. That was the daily ration. I took my food and sat in a corner. The bread was rock hard, the kind that would break your teeth if you tried to bite it. I did what I always did. I dropped the bread into the water to let it soak and soften. The guards finished serving and left. Just as I was about to eat, a tall shadow loomed over me. Hey kid, give me your food. I looked up. A man stood over me, at least 6'3", with a jagged scar running across his face. His eyes were bloodshot and fixed on my bowl with pure greed. For a man his size, one piece of bread was nothing. He needed more. and he decided I was the easiest target. To him, I was just a scrawny, pretty-faced kid who wouldn't fight back. I didn't move. I just looked down and stayed silent. Smart kid, the brute chuckled. He reached down to grab my bowl. The other prisoners watched, but no one moved to help. Some looked on with cold indifference. Others had mocking smiles. This was the law of the death row camp, survival of the fittest. They didn't pity me. They only regretted that they weren't the ones stealing my meal. The big man gripped the bowl, his voice dripping with fake kindness. Don't say I'm bullying you, since you're being so cooperative. I'll look after you in this cell from now on, the brute said, his voice a low growl. But in exchange, you're handing over half your rations every day. Got it. I stayed silent. I didn't look up. Li Dao, that was my name now, wasn't a talker. But my silence made the giant feel like he was losing face in front of the other prisoners. He grunted, raising a massive hand to backhand me across the face. Suddenly, a cold shiver seemed to run through the air. In that split second, I looked up. My right hand moved like a striking cobra, clutching something small and sharp. I lunged straight for his face. A sickening squelch echoed through the quiet cell. For a heartbeat, there was total silence. Then, a blood-curdling scream tore through the room. The brute dropped my bowl, his hands flying to his face. He staggered back, his body shaking, as blood began to pour between his fingers. Stuck deep in his left eye was a sharp wooden splinter I had hidden away. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Before he could recover, I lunged forward and looped my heavy iron shackles around his thick neck. I threw my weight backward, slamming him onto the stone floor. I planted both feet firmly on his shoulders, arching my back and pulling the chains with every ounce of strength in my body. The man forgot about his eye. He clawed at the iron links, choking the life out of him. Losing an eye was bad, but losing his breath meant death. He thrashed wildly, but I didn't let go. The veins in my arms bulged, and my muscles trembled from the strain. Let go, he wheezed, his struggle turning into a desperate plea for mercy. I remained expressionless. I was numb. My whole body shook from the effort, but I kept the chain tight. I knew the rules here. If he lived, I died. It was that simple. His movements grew weaker. His face turned bright red, then a deep, bruised purple. Finally, with one last twitch of resentment, he went still. He never imagined he'd be killed by a scrawny kid like me. I didn't let go immediately. I held the tension for another 30 seconds, making sure his heart had stopped for good. Only then did I release the chain. I exhaled a long, shaky breath and collapsed onto the floor, staring up at the dark ceiling. Killing someone was exhausting. People always talked about the guilt or the urge to vomit after taking a life, but I felt none of that. Back in my old life, I'd read enough news to know how brutal death row could be. I always expected the worst from people. My month in this camp had proven me right. I'd seen 7 or 8 prisoners die of starvation because someone stronger kept stealing their food. I was just lucky it took a month for someone to target me. I stood up and unwrapped the chains from his neck. They left a deep, purple-black bruise in the flesh. I walked over to where my bowl had shattered. The water was gone, soaked into the dirt, but the wet flatbread was still there. I didn't care about the filth. I picked it up, wiped off the worst of the dust, and sat in a corner to eat. As I sat down, the other prisoners scrambled away from me as if I were a demon. Most people in here were killers, but a man who kills without a word, without a change in expression, that's the kind of man they feared. I welcomed it. At least now, they'd leave me alone. I was about to take a bite of the bread when a crisp sound echoed in my head. Asterisk ding. First kill confirmed. Slaying system activated. Asterisk. Target killed. 1. Attribute points gained. 0.2. First kill bonus. 1.0 attribute points. A translucent blue screen flickered in front of my eyes, looking just like a character menu from a video game. Host. Li Dao Physique. 0.8 available points. 1.2. I stared. When I first realized I'd been reincarnated, I'd looked for a system, but nothing happened. It turned out I had to kill someone to trigger it. If I hadn't been sent to this camp, who knows if it ever would have woken up. The system was simple, deadly simple. Kill enemies, take their attributes, and add them to myself. I noticed there was only one category, physique. No strength, no speed, no magic. Just one bar. Curious, I focused my mind on the physique stat. The numbers shifted instantly. Physique, 1.0 available points, 1.0. A sudden wave of heat surged through my veins. It rushed into my limbs and even cleared the fog in my mind. The sensation lasted only a few seconds, but when it faded, I gasped. My thin frame felt denser. My muscles were more defined, and my senses felt sharper than ever. I realized then why there was only one stat. Physique covered everything: strength, speed, endurance, and even mental clarity. It was a total body upgrade. According to the system, a value of 1.0 was the average for a healthy adult male. I was no longer a scrawny kid. I was just getting started. My physique had only just reached the level of an average man. It was embarrassing, really. The original Li Dao had been a spoiled brat who never lifted anything heavier than a book, leaving me with a body that was weaker than a common peasant. I didn't hesitate. I looked at the system panel and dumped my remaining point into physique. The heat that followed was twice as intense as before. It surged through my veins like molten lead. Beneath my tattered tunic, my body began to transform. My muscles expanded and contracted with rhythmic force, and I could feel my internal organs shifting and strengthening. My mind cleared even further. Memories that had been blurry for years suddenly snapped into sharp focus. The heat lasted for nearly 20 breaths before fading. I looked down at myself. It felt like I'd gone through a second puberty in a matter of seconds. I was much broader now. My loose jersey, which had been hanging off my frame, was now tight against my chest and arms. Luckily, the cell was pitch black, so no one noticed the sudden change. I clenched my fists, feeling a raw sense of power. Looking at the iron shackles on my wrists, I felt like I could snap them like twigs. But I knew that was just an illusion caused by the sudden jump in strength. These chains were as thick as a thumb. According to the system, killing an enemy only granted me a fraction of their total attributes. The brute I'd killed had a physique nearly double that of a normal man, and even he couldn't break these. By my estimate, I'd need a physique score of at least 5.0 to rip iron apart. That meant killing 50 enemies. My eyes drifted toward the other prisoners huddled in the dark. The thought crossed my mind, but I pushed it away. I wanted to get stronger, but I wasn't going to become a mindless monster. If I started killing people just for points, I'd become a slave to the system. Besides, the system was called the slaying system. It implied I had to kill enemies. These men were death row prisoners like me, but we had no grudge. They weren't my enemies, at least, not yet. Everything depended on my own judgment. If someone crossed me, they became an enemy instantly. Suddenly, my stomach let out a thunderous growl. A hunger more intense than anything I'd ever felt clawed at my insides. It was a side effect of the upgrade. A stronger body required more fuel. I looked at the soggy piece of bread in my hand. It was pathetic. I brushed off the dirt and shoved it into my mouth, but it felt like a drop of water in an ocean. I finally understood why the brute had been so desperate to steal food. For a man with high physical demands, these rations were a joke. I leaned against the cold wall and closed my eyes. Sleeping was the only way to save energy. My right hand stayed tight around a sharpened wooden splinter I'd hidden. Even with double the strength of a normal man, I was still flesh and blood. A knife to the throat would kill me just the same. Some time later, a noise at the door jolted me awake. 2 soldiers stepped into the cell, the light from their torches flickering against the damp walls. They spotted the brute's corpse and didn't even blink. Death was a daily occurrence here. "Look at that, another one's gone," one soldier chuckled. "This one's mine." "Fine, take it," the other replied, waving him off. The first soldier knelt beside the body and pulled a small knife from his belt. With a practiced motion, he sliced off the brute's left ear. He didn't look disgusted. He wrapped the bloody trophy in a rag and tucked it into his shirt with a grin. They grabbed the corpse by the legs and dragged it out, leaving a red trail on the floor. I watched them go, my expression blank. I knew why he took the ear. In the border regions of the Great Qin dynasty, a left ear was a receipt for a kill. This empire was built on a military merit system. To climb the social ladder, you needed heads, or rather, ears. 1 ear equaled 1 kill. If a soldier collected enough, he got a promotion and a raise. Since the brute was already dead, the soldier was just stealing the credit to pad his own record. The higher-ups allowed the prisoners to kill each other, but they strictly forbade soldiers from executing us themselves. It was the only thing keeping the guards from slaughtering us for easy promotions. In this camp, we had zero rights, but there was one sliver of hope. Since the founding of the Great Qin, there had been a rule. If a death row prisoner earned enough military merit, their crimes would be wiped clean. They would receive a new identity and a chance to live as a free person. But the cost was staggering. To leave, you needed 500 left ears. 500 kills. For most prisoners, it was an impossible dream. We were used as cannon fodder, sent into the most dangerous parts of the battlefield. Most died in their first skirmish. Killing 500 men while surviving the front lines was a feat fewer than 5 people had ever achieved in the history of the dynasty. Before the system woke up, I would have been in despair. Now, 500 seemed like a lot, but it was just a number. I didn't just want to escape this camp. I wanted to thrive in this world. I knew how comfortable the life of a high-ranking official could be, and I wanted it. I set my first goal: collect 500 ears and get out of this hellhole. Time ticked away in the darkness. Then, the cell door creaked open again. It was time. The death row mission had begun. A week passed in a blur. I spent my days sitting in the same corner, chewing on dry, soaked flour cakes. Ever since I killed the brute, nobody had dared to mess with me. In fact, the whole cell was strangely quiet. Everyone was on edge, wondering if the person next to them was a hidden killer like me. They didn't want to end up like the brute, dead, ears cut off, and their bodies tossed into the wilderness for the beasts to eat. Part of me liked the peace, but the other part was getting restless. My system was quiet. Without enemies to fight, I couldn't get stronger. I started to regret scaring everyone so badly. If no one picked a fight, I was stuck. I told myself to be patient. In a place like the death row camp, trouble always finds you eventually. Suddenly, the heavy thud of boots echoed outside. I looked up. A group of guards was approaching, led by a man in polished armor. He looked like an officer, someone far above the rank-and-file soldiers. One of the jailers rushed forward, bowing low. "Deputy Chief Liu, what brings you here today?" Liu didn't waste words. He held up a hand to cut the man off. "I'm on a mission. I need to pull 20 men from the death row camp." His voice wasn't loud, but it hit the room like a thunderclap. Panic instantly washed over the faces of the prisoners. We all knew what being pulled meant. It meant being used as human shields for the regular army. We were cannon fodder, sent in to draw enemy fire or clear minefields. If 10 men went out, maybe one came back if they were incredibly lucky. Most of the time, it was a one-way trip. "What kind of men do you need, Deputy Chief?" the jailer asked eagerly. "Not too old," Liu replied, glancing at the cells. "And no cripples. You pick them for me." The older prisoners let out audible sighs of relief. The younger, healthy ones started praying to whatever gods they knew, hoping to be overlooked. The jailer nodded and headed straight for the first cell. My cell. 2 guards stepped inside, their eyes scanning us like butchers picking out livestock. We all tried to shrink into the shadows, avoiding eye contact. "You, out," a guard barked, pointing at a man near the middle. The man didn't move. He tried to blend into the crowd, pretending he hadn't heard. The guard's face twisted into a cold smirk. "You think you can hide?" He lunged forward, grabbed the prisoner by his hair, and dragged him screaming toward the door. "I won't go. I won't go," the man shrieked, kicking his legs wildly. The guard didn't hesitate. He drew his blade and pressed the cold steel against the man's throat. "Go, or die right here." The prisoner froze. The chill of the blade snapped something in him. Suddenly, he shoved his left thumb into his mouth and bit down with a sickening crack. He spat his own thumb onto the floor, blood spraying his face. He looked up with a manic, desperate grin. According to the laws of the Great Qin, a man with a missing thumb is a cripple, he panted. "I'm useless now. I don't have to go." The guard started laughing. It wasn't a kind sound. The guard with the sword lowered his weapon, looking at the man with genuine amusement. "Look at you. A death row dog who actually knows the law." The prisoner straightened up, a flicker of his old pride returning. "I was an 8th rank official before this. I've studied the classics since I was a child." "An 8th rank official?" The guard sneered. "Even if you were a 1st rank minister, it wouldn't matter in here." He raised his sword again. "I'll give you 2 choices. Either you bite off your right thumb too, or you get in line." The man looked at his right hand and went pale. Losing a left thumb was a sacrifice, but losing the right meant he was finished. He wouldn't be able to hold a bowl, a tool, or a weapon. In this camp, being that helpless was a slow death sentence. He realized the guards didn't care about the law, they just wanted their quota. With a heavy sigh, he stood up and walked out, defeated. The guards went back to picking. Everyone tried to disappear into the walls, but there was nowhere to go. One by one, men were dragged out, their faces masked in pure despair. Then, a finger pointed at me. "You look healthy enough." Out. I was the only one in my corner, so there was no mistaking it. Unlike the others, I didn't scream or beg. I simply stood up and walked into the line. The guard gave me a second look, surprised by my calm, but he quickly dismissed me as just another pretty boy who would probably wet himself the moment he saw a real battlefield. Inside, I was a mix of nerves and adrenaline. I had been in this hole for over a month. I was ready to see the sky. I knew I needed kills to trigger my system and get stronger, and while I was nervous about facing real soldiers, I knew this was my only way out. If I could survive the first mission, everything would change. Once they had 20 of us, Deputy Chief Lu nodded and let us out. We followed him toward a set of stone stairs. At the top, I could see a faint glimmer of natural light. My heart hammered against my ribs. We climbed the steps, and the wooden doors at the top creaked open. As I stepped out, the heat of the sun hit me like a physical weight. I squinted, my eyes stinging from the brightness. For a split second, I took a deep breath, smelling the air of the outside world. It felt like freedom. Then, I looked down at the heavy iron shackles on my wrists and ankles, and the reality of the situation came crashing back. The rest of the prisoners shuffled along behind me, their spirits crushed as they finally accepted the reality of our situation. I didn't look at them. I took a deep breath of the hot, dry air, tasting the grit of the wind-blown sand on my tongue. I scanned my surroundings. Tents were pitched everywhere, and soldiers moved back and forth with purposeful strides. "Stay close," Deputy Chief Lu barked, glancing back at us. "If you wander off and get killed by a guard who thinks you're an escaping death row inmate, don't blame me for not warning you." He led us into a large tent filled with stacks of military uniforms. They were identical to what the regular soldiers wore, though these looked frayed and secondhand. "Put these on," Lu said, pointing to the pile. "Once you're dressed, I'll brief you on tonight's mission." The others nodded numbly and began digging through the clothes. I found a set that looked relatively clean, stripped off my prisoner rags, and pulled it on. Within minutes, we looked less like skeletons and more like a makeshift squad. Lu nodded, seemingly satisfied with our transformation. "Listen up. Tonight, your job is to accompany us on a raid against a small northern barbarian camp. If we succeed, you're still death row prisoners, but you'll earn military merit. That means a better life in the camp. And," he paused, lowering his voice for effect, "I personally promise that if the mission is a success, you'll get a feast. Meat and wine for everyone." The mention of food changed the energy instantly. A few of the men actually started drooling. I couldn't blame them. My own stomach let out a traitorous growl. Living on one piece of dry bread a day was its own kind of torture. Lu saw our reactions and smirked. He turned to a nearby soldier and whispered, "Watch them. When it gets dark, lead them out of the city and issue the weapons." "Is it worth the resources, sir?" the soldier asked quietly. "You idiot," Lu hissed. "If they don't eat, how will they have the strength to block blades for you?" Night fell quickly. We were led to a grassy clearing outside the military camp where Lu was waiting. "Hand out the weapons," he ordered. Soldiers brought out a large basket filled with a chaotic assortment of gear. They handed them out one by one. The quality was pathetic. One man got a long spear, another a broken wooden staff. One poor soul was handed a broken blade that was barely half a sword. When they reached me, I was handed a long sword covered in thick, orange rust. I called it the tetanus blade in my head. The edge was so dull it was practically a curve. There wasn't a sharp point to be found. I understood why, though. You don't give high-quality steel to a group of prisoners with zero loyalty. If we decided to turn on them, better we did it with rusty junk than sharp imperial blades. Besides, we were just cannonballs. Giving us good gear was a waste. The other prisoners grumbled under their breath, but no one dared to speak up. With our uniforms on and our weapons in hand, We followed Lu and 100 regular soldiers into the dark expanse of the grasslands. We marched for hours. Finally, Lu signaled for us to stop. "We're here." I looked where he was pointing. In the distance, a campfire flickered against the black horizon. Figures in strange, fur-lined clothing moved around the flames. These weren't people of the Great Qin dynasty. These were the nomadic barbarians of the northern plains. "You lot are going to creep up with us," Lu whispered, his eyes cold. "Your job is to charge the camp and set fire to everything. Create as much noise and chaos as possible to draw their attention. That will let my men circle around and hit them from the rear." The prisoners paled. Charging a barbarian camp, even a small one, was a suicide mission. We were a disorganized mob of starving men going up against trained warriors. "Don't worry," Lu added, sensing the panic. "We won't let you die for nothing. Just start the fires and create a distraction. Once we join the fray, you'll be safe. Just hide and stay out of the way. I don't even need you to kill anyone." His tone was convincing enough that some of the men actually relaxed. They looked at the 100 regular soldiers, then at the small barbarian camp, and nodded. Lu waved his hand, and the regular soldiers vanished into the darkness, flanking the camp. I followed the rest of the prisoners as we crawled to within 50 yards of the perimeter. Lu and 2 soldiers stayed with us. "Take out the sentries," Lu commanded. He vanished into the night. A few moments later, the hoot of an owl echoed through the air. Lu reappeared and nodded at us. "Sentries are dealt with. Now it's up to you. Wait for my whistle, then move." The prisoners traded nervous glances, clutching their junk weapons. I stayed in the middle of the pack, neither first nor last. I gripped the hilt of my rusty sword so hard my knuckles turned white. It was the only thing giving me a sense of security. Suddenly, a sharp whistle pierced the silence. "Do it," someone yelled. "For a chance to live. Go." The prisoners screamed, a mix of terror and desperation, as they sprinted toward the camp. There was no turning back now. The camp exploded into life. The barbarians were fast. They grabbed their weapons and began barking orders in a language I didn't understand. "Enemy attack," they shouted. "It's the Qin. Kill them all. For the great God." I moved through the chaos, staying low. Whenever I saw a tent, I used my sword to hook a brand from a nearby fire and tossed it onto the fabric. Smoke began to fill the air. "Don't kill me. Please." A scream erupted nearby. I turned and saw a fellow prisoner stumbling back from a barbarian soldier. The prisoner was weak and terrified, dropping to his knees to beg for mercy. The barbarian didn't hesitate. With one clean sweep of his blade, the prisoner's head left his shoulders, spraying blood across the grass. Because I was standing in a direct line behind him, the barbarian looked up. Our eyes locked. He had just tasted blood, and now he was looking at me. The barbarian soldier didn't waste time. He saw how scrawny I looked and decided I was an easy mark. He didn't even call for backup. He just raised his blade and charged straight at me. "Die, Qin dog," he screamed. As he closed the distance, he swung his long blade in a heavy, horizontal arc. I didn't panic. I raised my rusty sword, bracing for the impact. Clang. The sound of metal hitting metal rang out, sparks flying between us. Our blades locked in midair. I could feel the weight of his strike, but to my surprise, I wasn't buckling. The barbarian's eyes widened. He looked confused. He couldn't understand how a scrawny prisoner like me was holding his ground. He had time to wonder, but I didn't have time to chat. I realized right then that I was actually stronger than him. With a sudden burst of energy, I shoved upward, throwing his blade off balance. Before he could recover, I swung my rusty tetanus blade hard at his throat. Squelch. Blood sprayed across my face, warm and metallic. But something went wrong. The man didn't die instantly. My sword was so damn dull that it got stuck halfway through his neck. It felt sickening, like trying to saw through leather with a butter knife. The barbarian collapsed, clutching his throat and howling in agony. He thrashed on the ground, blood soaking into the dirt. I stared at him, feeling a bit guilty. "Sorry," I muttered under my breath. "It's not that I didn't want to give you a clean end. This weapon is just garbage. Honestly, if it wasn't for my unnatural strength, that dull blade wouldn't have even broken the skin." Since his neck had basically stolen my sword, I reached down and grabbed his long, sharp blade from the grass. I gave it a quick test swing. Now this was a weapon. I didn't let the man suffer any longer. I stepped forward and ended his pain with one clean stroke. Then, I knelt down and sliced off his left ear. I needed the kill, but I also needed the proof for my reward. Suddenly, a notification pinged in my mind. Kill confirmed. Attribute points gained, 0.15. A wave of relief washed over me. In this hellhole, these points were the only thing that gave me a sense of security. Without hesitating, I dumped the points straight into my physique. A familiar warmth flowed through my veins. My grip on the new sword felt even firmer. I stayed low, moving through the smoke until I reached another tent. I heard movement inside. My eyes lit up. I pressed myself against the fabric near the entrance and waited. A few seconds later, a soldier poked his head out. Slash. Blood splattered against the white fabric. Kill confirmed. Attribute points gained, 0.12. Ada? What happened out there? A voice called from inside. I took a deep breath and ducked into the tent. You? A Chin soldier? How did you? I didn't let him finish. A spray of red painted the interior of the tent, and the shouting stopped. The place was a mess and smelled like unwashed bodies, but I didn't care. I gave the body a kick to make sure he was done. Kill confirmed. Attribute points gained, 0.13. I pulled up my mental status board. Host, Lin Yuan. Physique, 2.15. Available points, 0.25. I immediately pumped those points into my physique again. I didn't know if these points were good for anything else, but being harder to kill seemed like the best strategy for now. The heat surged through me again, making my muscles denser and my heart beat stronger. Physique, 2.4. I was nearly 2.5 times stronger than an average person. I felt safer, but it wasn't enough. To feel truly secure, I figured I needed to get that number to at least 10. Outside, the noise was getting louder. I sliced the ears off the two men in the tent, wrapped them in a cloth, and tucked them into my tunic. Then, I stepped back out into the chaos. The distraction worked. Deputy Chief Liu had finally blown his whistle, signaling the regular army to charge. The barbarian camp was a disaster zone. Seeing the actual Qin military arriving, the barbarians lost their edge. They stopped attacking and started trying to hold their ground. I prowled through the camp like a wolf. Whenever I found a barbarian alone, I moved in for the kill. With my boosted physique, I didn't even need fancy martial arts. I was faster and stronger. Each kill felt smoother than the last. I wasn't just swinging wildly anymore. I was becoming efficient. Eventually, people started to notice. The barbarians began to bunch up, terrified of the madman tearing through their lines. Even the regular Qin soldiers noticed me. They started following my lead, using me as the tip of the spear to clear out the pockets of resistance. I parried a blow meant for a Qin regular and counterattacked, burying my blade in the barbarian's chest. Thanks, the soldier gasped, breathless. I didn't answer. I was looking at my notifications. Kill confirmed. Attribute points gained, 0.2. This guy must have been an elite. He was worth double a regular soldier. I was actually starting to enjoy this when a loud voice boomed over the camp. Drop your weapons. Surrender, and you will be spared. It was Liu. I felt a surge of panic. Surrender? If they stopped fighting, how was I supposed to get more points? Stopping me from killing was like stealing money out of my pocket. Before the barbarians could make a decision, I grabbed a second sword off the ground. Dual-wielding now, I charged at the remaining group of enemies. My ferocity was the final straw. The barbarian's courage broke completely. I surrender. Don't kill me, one screamed, throwing his weapon down. The others followed suit, dropping to their knees. My blade stopped just an inch from one soldier's throat. He let out a long breath of relief. Then, seeing the frustration in my eyes, he actually gave me a smug, mocking look. He thought he was safe because of the rules of war. Swing. His head rolled across the grass. What are you doing? The other barbarian screamed. He surrendered. You're murdering prisoners. You're breaking the rules. I just shrugged and wiped the blood off my cheek. Sorry, I said calmly. My hand slipped. The camp went silent for a second. Then the barbarians started cursing me out, screaming every insult they knew. I mean, who slips and accidentally decapitates a guy? Swing. Another head hit the dirt, silencing the shouting. Now, everyone was staring at me in pure shock, even the Qin soldiers. Once could be an accident. Twice looked a lot like a habit. I turned my gaze toward the remaining northern barbarian soldiers. My expression stayed flat as I spoke. Sorry. My hand slipped again. This time, not a single barbarian dared to curse. They just stared at me with eyes full of pure terror, hurling silent insults in their heads because they were too afraid to open their mouths. Who's murdering prisoners? Do you have a death wish? A voice boomed from the crowd of Great Chin soldiers. Deputy Chief Lu pushed his way through the ranks, his face twisted in anger. Who did this? He demanded, his eyes scanning the carnage. In the next second, every finger in the camp pointed directly at me. What's your name? Lu asked, his glare landing on me. I casually tossed the blood-stained sword onto the grass. My voice was calm. 95-27. Lu blinked, stunned for a moment. Then his head snapped up. You're from the death row camp? The air seemed to freeze. Everyone, the regular soldiers and the captured barbarians alike, stared at me in disbelief. I didn't try to deny it. There was no point in lying about something they could easily look up. I just nodded. A collective gasp went up. Most death row prisoners were just cannon fodder. They usually died in the first wave or spent the battle shivering in a hole somewhere. But a death row inmate who fought on the front lines with dual blades and actually survived? That was rarer than a national treasure. Lu took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. Why did you kill the prisoners? My hand slipped, I said. Lu's face twitched. You slipped twice. The first time was my left hand, I explained. The second time was my right. It's different. Lu stared at me. The barbarians stared at me. Suddenly, shink. A long blade flipped up from the ground as if kicked by a ghost, flying straight through the air. It pierced the throat of the barbarian who had been thinking the loudest insults. The camp went silent again. Lu's face turned a deep, angry red. 9527. What do you have to say for that one? I shrugged. Sorry. My left foot slipped that time. Lu let out a sharp, frustrated laugh. And let me guess, your right foot is about to slip next. Who knows? I replied. The barbarians were completely broken. It was bad enough being beaten into surrender by a death row inmate, but now they were being executed one by one while we argued about it. They had zero rights here. Seeing my dead pig unafraid of boiling water attitude, Lu lost his temper. But what could he really do to a man already sentenced to death? Military law? I wasn't even a real soldier. Kill me? I was already scheduled for execution. Besides, this night raid was a massive success, and a huge part of that was thanks to me. The stronger a death row prisoner was, the fewer regular soldiers died. Lu couldn't bring himself to waste a tool this useful. He decided to settle for a light punishment. He didn't realize I was acting this way because I knew exactly what he was thinking. I was already on death row. What were they going to do? Sentence me to death twice? 9527. Because you murdered prisoners, you won't receive any credit for the mission itself, Lu barked. Does the credit for the enemies I killed still count? I asked. How many did you even kill? I didn't say a word. I reached into my tunic and pulled out a blood-soaked cloth bundle. I unwrapped it to reveal a pile of severed left ears. I counted them out loud. 18. Plus the 3 on the ground makes 21. Lu looked at the 3 dead prisoners, and his face darkened. Those 3 don't count. If killing prisoners counted as combat kills, everyone would be doing it. I didn't argue. Fine. 18 then. I didn't care about the ears. I already had the attribute points. But the number 18 sent a shockwave through the regular soldiers. The Great Chin and the Northern Barbarians had been at war for a century. Usually, the kill ratio was 1-to-1. Even in a successful ambush, it might be 1-to-2. But I had personally taken down 18 men. That was more than most regular soldiers killed in their entire careers. Lu took a long, deep breath. As punishment for the prisoners, your basic mission rewards are gone. If you do it again, I'll strip your combat kills too. I actually smiled at that. Thanks, Deputy Chief. Now that I knew how good those attribute points felt, I didn't care about official military merits. As long as I kept getting stronger, everything else would come naturally. I don't know why you ended up on death row, Lu grunted. But if you have talent, don't waste it being arrogant. And don't get any ideas about running away. Understand? I knew what he meant. He was warning me not to use my strength to desert. I could have run earlier, but where would I go? My identity had been erased when I entered the camp. I was a black household now. Without papers, I'd be an outcast everywhere. If the authorities caught me, I'd be a wanted criminal in any kingdom. In this world, having no identity was like having no ID card in my past life. You might be fine for a while, but the moment someone checked, you were finished. I wanted to fight my way out of the death row camp legally and earn a clean, new identity. I had family in this world I wanted to see, and I couldn't go back to them as a fugitive. The barbarians were rounded up, and the cleanup began. Usually, death row survivors were locked back in cages immediately. But because I had saved so many soldiers, no one mentioned it. Plus, out of the 20 death row inmates sent tonight, I was the only one left alive. I wandered over to a campfire where a leg of lamb was roasting. I didn't ask for permission. I grabbed it and started tearing into the meat like a wild animal. After weeks of starving, the taste was incredible. As I ate, I whispered in my mind, status. A translucent screen popped up. Host, Lin Yuan, physique, 3.16, available points, 1.24. My physique was already 3 times that of a normal human. I had racked up a lot of points during the heat of the battle. While I chewed on the lamb, I dumped every single point into my physique. A wave of intense heat surged through my veins. The sudden strengthening put a massive strain on my body, making my hunger even more ravenous. Crunch. I bit straight through the lamb meat and the bone. With a body 3 times stronger than a normal man, my teeth were like steel. I swallowed the bone whole, feeling the power settle into my core. The bone snapped and crunched between my teeth as I swallowed it whole. Within a dozen breaths, the heat in my veins receded. My body felt different, heavier, but in a way that signaled pure, concentrated power. I checked my status again. My physique was now 4.40. I was more than 4 times stronger than a normal man. I looked at the rusty tetanus blade in my hand. With my current strength, I felt like I could cleave a man in half even with this piece of junk. If I'd had this power earlier, I wouldn't have needed to be so cautious. I could have charged straight into the barbarian ranks and turned the battlefield into a slaughterhouse. For times the physique didn't just mean raw strength. It meant 4 times the stamina, 4 times the recovery speed, and incredible reflexes. While my actual movement speed didn't quadruple, it increased more gradually. The combination was terrifying. With this strength, even a simple iron bar became a lethal weapon. With this stamina, I was a perpetual motion machine. I could swing a blade all night without breaking a sweat. My reactions were so sharp that a normal soldier's movements looked like they were happening in slow motion. In a world of cold steel and ancient warfare, I was becoming a god of the battlefield. And this was only the beginning. It had only been a week since I gained the system. My power was a snowball, and it was only getting bigger. The cleanup finished quickly. These barbarians were just a small scouting party, so there wasn't much loot to haul back. I finished my meal, feeling satisfied. The meat wasn't seasoned like the barbecue from my past life, but compared to the slop in the death row camp, it was a feast fit for a king. 95-27. A voice called out from behind me. I turned to see Deputy Chief Liu. He was leading a sturdy chestnut horse. He patted the saddle and looked at me. "Can you ride?" "I can," I replied. As a former third-class military noble in this world, even if I'd bribed my way through the exams, I knew the basics of horsemanship. Liu nodded, seemingly pleased. "Then take this horse and follow us back," Liu said. He paused, his eyes narrowing. "I'll give you one last piece of advice. With your skills, it's not impossible to leave the death row camp legally. Don't make the wrong decision." "Understood," I said. We had marched here on foot under the cover of night, but the return journey on horseback was fast. Soon, we reached Changgu town, the border stronghold where the army was stationed. As soon as I dismounted, Liu walked over and handed me a set of heavy iron shackles for my hands and feet. I didn't resist. I took them and locked myself back in. To anyone else, these were chains. To me, they were just a temporary costume. I would throw them away when the time was right. I was escorted back to the familiar, grime-stained cell of the death row camp. When the door creaked open, the other prisoners froze. They looked at me like they were seeing a ghost. They hadn't expected me to come back alive, and seeing that I was the only survivor, their faces filled with a new kind of fear. I ignored them. I walked to my corner and sat down. The adrenaline from the fight had finally worn off, leaving me exhausted. I closed my eyes and drifted off. I didn't even bother holding a wooden shiv for protection this time. With a physique 4 times stronger than theirs, my senses were razor sharp. If anyone even breathed too close to me, I'd know. I slept for a full 16 hours. When I finally woke up the next morning, I stretched, my bones popping like firecrackers. I felt incredible. Then, a scent hit my nose. It was rich, savory, and unmistakable. Meat? I smell meat, someone screamed. Is that wine? Please, just one drop. I'll die happy if I can just have one sip. The cell block went into a frenzy. The long-term prisoners were losing their minds, clawing at the wooden bars and sniffing the air like rabid dogs. A jailer walked down the hall carrying a wooden tray. On it sat a whole roasted chicken and a jar of wine. The jailer stopped at my cell and unlocked the door. Who is 9527? I stood up and stepped forward. That's me. The jailer gave me a thin smile. 9527, you did well on the last mission. Centurion Liu sent this as a reward. I took the tray. Tell the Centurion I said thanks. The jailer's attitude was surprisingly decent. He clearly knew I was someone Liu favored. Before leaving, he patted my shoulder and whispered, better eat it fast. I sat against the wall and tore off a drumstick, taking a huge, greasy bite. I uncorked the wine and took a long swig. Around me, dozens of eyes watched every movement of my jaw. I could hear them swallowing their spit. Suddenly, a man stood up and shuffled over to me. He tried to wipe the grime off his face to look more approachable. Little brother, could I just have one bite? Just one. I promise. I looked him over. He had a face that tried to look kind, but his eyes were shifty. Are you a Yazi, a human trafficker? I asked coldly. The man stiffened for a second, then shook his head quickly. No. I'm a victim. I was a 9th-rank government official, wrongly accused. An official? I smirked. I used a greasy finger to trace a simple character in the dirt on the floor. Do you recognize this word then, official? He leaned in, squinting. This is a rare character. I can't quite place it at the moment. My smile turned into a sneer. My mistake. That's not a word. It's a scribble. The man's face twisted. The fake kindness vanished, replaced by a mask of pure rage. You're playing with me? What if I am? I'll kill you. The kind, old man lunged at my face. His hand was hidden, clutching a sharpened wooden stake. He thought he was being fast. He thought he was using my own trick against me. But in my eyes, he was moving through molasses. I reached out and caught his wrist midair. With a sharp twist, there was a sickening crack. The old man's wrist snapped like a dry twig. He let out a blood-curdling scream, but my expression didn't change. I looked him dead in the eye and let out a cold laugh. You don't even know the word for death, yet you claim to be an official? The pain finally broke him. His arrogance vanished, replaced by pure, trembling terror. Don't kill me. I don't want the food anymore. Please spare me. Human traffickers all deserve to die, I said flatly. I delivered a single, brutal kick to his chest. There was a dull thud as he flew backward, hitting the stone wall with such force he seemed to hang there for a second like a macabre painting. When he finally slid to the floor, the back of his head left a smear of crimson against the gray stone. He didn't get up. A familiar chime echoed in my head. Asterisk enemy killed. Attribute points gained. 0.09. Asterisk. I was actually a bit surprised. I didn't expect a white-haired old man to provide that much of a boost. But then I realized, if you're a professional kidnapper, you have to be fit. If you aren't fast and strong, you get beaten to death by angry parents long before you reach old age. In the ancient world, Yazi were the lowest of the low. They used their age or a kind face to lure people into a false sense of security. The moment I saw his gentle smile, I knew exactly what he was. No one survives in a death row camp by being a nice old man. He looked exactly like the predators I'd seen in police files back in my old life. If he'd smiled at me like that on the street, I might have ignored him. But smiling like that in this hellhole? He clearly took me for a fool. I sat back down and finished my meal as if nothing had happened. My ruthlessness had done its job. The other prisoners backed away, their greedy eyes darting elsewhere. Nobody dared to approach me again. Part of me felt a tiny bit of regret. If he'd been a common thief or a brawler, I might have shown some patience. But for a human trafficker, I had zero. A few minutes later, I was full. I leaned against the wall and started chewing on the chicken bones, grinding them down until every scrap of marrow was gone. The other prisoners watched me with hollow, disappointed eyes. They had been hoping I'd leave at least a bone or two for them to suck on. I didn't leave them a single feather. I closed my eyes and focused on my status screen. I dumped my new points into my physicality. Host, Li Dao. Physicality, 4.49. Available points, 0. I felt another surge of strength ripple through my muscles. I looked down at the heavy iron chains on my wrists. I had the distinct feeling that if I really wanted to, these things couldn't hold me anymore. But while the chains were weak, my status as a death row prisoner was still a problem. I needed to wait for the right moment to break free of that. 3 days passed in that dark cell. I spent the time sleeping or meditating, keeping my energy high. I wasn't worried. I knew that after showing my strength during the first raid, Deputy Chief Lu wouldn't let a tool as useful as me sit idle for long. Sure enough, heavy footsteps echoed down the stone corridor. A guard appeared at my door, the keys jingling as he unlocked the gate. 9527. Get out here. I stood up, stretched my aching limbs, and followed him out, my chains clanking against the floor. I could see the other prisoners watching me with twisted grins. In their minds, surviving the first mission was just luck. They were sure I'd be coming back in a body bag this time. Outside, I saw a familiar face. 9527. Deputy Chief Lu called out. I kept my word, didn't I? I gave him a thin smile. The meat was good. The wine was better. Lu stepped forward and slapped me on the shoulder, acting like we were old friends. If you finish this next mission, I'll double the reward. Same deal, just twice as much. I looked at him, my eyes narrowing. It sounds like this mission isn't going to be simple. Lu's smile faded. He leaned in and lowered his voice. It's a tough one. We need to ambush a squad of northern barbarian cavalry. Cavalry. My heart skipped a beat. That wasn't just tough. For a group of prisoners, that was a suicide mission. The northern barbarians were legendary for their horsemanship. Their children could ride before they can walk. Their cavalry units were the elite of the elite. Fast, mobile, and deadly. But I didn't feel fear. Instead, I felt a strange, buzzing heat in my chest. Maybe it was the system's influence, but the thought of a real fight made me feel restless. I wasn't afraid. I was excited. If I were still the weakling I was a week ago, I'd be looking for a place to hide. But now, I wanted to see what I could do. Are we the front line again? I asked. Lu didn't answer directly. He just glanced at my tattered clothes and blinked. That was a yes. The process was the same as before. We were led to a military tent to change, and Lu began the briefing. When the other prisoners heard the word cavalry, the color drained from their faces. Some started to protest, but they shut up real quick when they saw the regular soldiers half-drawing their blades. In this place, you either took your chances in battle or you died right here on the grass. Because the mission was urgent, the weapons were handed out immediately. But this time, when the guard reached me, he didn't hand me a rusty piece of junk. He handed me 2 brand new, gleaming long blades. The other prisoners exploded. This isn't fair, one shouted, waving his notched, rusted sword. Why does he get the new steel? I want a new weapon. Yeah, we're all death row scum. Why is he special? He's just a pretty boy. He doesn't deserve those blades. The noise was deafening until a cold voice cut through the air. Shut up, all of you. Lu stepped forward, glaring at the mob. You want weapons like 9527? Then go take them from the barbarians ourselves. Kill a soldier, take his blade. That's the rule. Then why did he get those? A prisoner demanded. Lu chuckled, pointing at my new swords. Because those 2 blades were the ones he took off the barbarians he killed during the last raid. He earned them. Did you? The crowd went silent. They looked at me, then at the blades, then back at me. Despite my training, I still looked relatively lean compared to some of the hulking brutes in the unit. I looked small to them. They couldn't wrap their heads around it. Lu looked at me and smirked. 9527. Why don't you go ahead and convince them? I nodded and stepped forward, the new blades catching the light. I looked at the group of angry men and let out a soft, dangerous smile. Anyone who isn't convinced, step out, I said. If you beat me, these blades are yours. The words had barely left my lips when a massive figure lunged forward from the crowd. He was nearly 2 meters tall, skin dark and muscles bulging like iron cables. He looked like a human fortress. A wave of regret rippled through the other prisoners. They realized they'd been too slow. They thought I was an easy mark, a pretty boy who couldn't fight, and now this brute had claimed the prize first. The big man grinned, looking at me with pure disdain. "Hey, pretty boy, hand over those blades now, and I might go easy on you. Otherwise, I might accidentally crush the life out of you." I didn't waste words. With a flick of my wrist, I sent one of my blades whistling through the air. It thudded into the dirt right at his feet, vibrating with lethal intent. I raised a hand and beckoned him forward. "Let's talk," I said. "You're asking for death," he roared. He snatched up a long blade and swung it in a massive horizontal arc aimed straight for my head. It was a killing blow, fueled by raw power. I didn't flinch. I simply raised my remaining blade and swung. The crowd gasped, expecting to see me cleaved in two. Instead, a sharp crack echoed through the clearing. Steel shattered. When the dust settled, my blade was perfectly intact. The big man was staring stupidly at the broken hilt in his hand. Then came the sound of tearing flesh. A thin red line appeared at the center of his forehead. It zipped down his face, past his neck, and all the way to his abdomen. A geyser of blood erupted from the wound. The giant collapsed, his body hitting the dirt with a heavy thud. A notification flashed in my mind. Asterisk enemy slain. Attribute points gained, 0.22. My eyes lit up. This guy hadn't grown all that muscle for nothing. He was a goldmine of attributes. The silence that followed was deafening. The big man's corpse lay there, cooling in the dirt, and any desire the other prisoners had to challenge me vanished instantly. They weren't jealous anymore. They were terrified. They were just glad they hadn't stepped out first. Deputy Chief Liu looked around at the trembling mob. Any more objections? The prisoners shook their heads in unison. Nobody wanted to be the next body on the pile. "Good," Liu barked. "Move out." We marched for 4 hours, reaching a narrow mountain pass where the ancient road squeezed between two steep, forested peaks. This was the kill zone. Our job was to be the anvil, the first line of defense to stop the northern barbarian cavalry in their tracks, while Liu's regulars hammered them from the sides. Liu positioned us and sent scouts ahead. I found a quiet spot under a tree, leaned my back against the trunk, and began sharpening my blade with a whetstone. Strength was great, but efficiency was better. A sharp blade meant faster kills. While I worked, I dumped my new attribute points into my physique. Name: Li Dao. Physique: 4.71. Available points: 0. I was now nearly 5 times stronger than an average man. I wondered if there was a limit to this growth. If I could keep stacking points forever, I would become something beyond human. A scout came sprinting back, breathless. "Chief, they're coming. The barbarians are close." Liu stood up, his face hardening. "Get into position, wait for my whistle, then charge. Don't let a single one through." I gripped my long blade and moved to my spot. This was my second time, and the nerves were gone. In their place was a strange, buzzing excitement. A few minutes later, the rhythmic thumping of hooves echoed through the pass. Shadows appeared in the distance, the northern barbarian cavalry. I could hear the heavy breathing of the prisoners around me. Even the regular soldiers were tense. The barbarians had a reputation for being monsters on the battlefield, and that reputation was written in blood. As the riders entered the heart of the ambush, Liu blew his whistle. A rain of arrows hissed from the treeline, arching toward the cavalry. We expected a massacre, but the lead barbarian rider just smirked. "Defend," he roared. In one fluid motion, the riders pulled iron bucklers from their saddles. The arrow storm rattled harmlessly against the shields. Only a few horses were grazed. The men were untouched. Liu's face went pale. They were too fast. It was like they knew we were coming. But there was no time to think. The whistle had already signaled the charge. The death row prisoners were already screaming as they ran down the slope. I followed, though I kept my eyes sharp. If things turned into a slaughter, I had the speed to vanish into the woods. I wasn't going to die for a dynasty that saw me as fodder. The barbarians were ready for the ground assault too. The outer riders leveled 3-meter-long spears, forming a wall of steel points. The first wave of prisoners ran straight into them. Half of our unit was impaled in seconds. The rest skidded to a halt, paralyzed by fear. I didn't stop. A wall of spears might stop a normal man, but I wasn't normal. As I neared the line, 3 spears lunged at me simultaneously, aiming for my throat and chest. To my enhanced senses, the spears seemed to move in slow motion. I twisted my body mid-air, sliding through the narrow gaps between the wooden shafts with impossible grace. I landed inside their formation. The barbarians looked stunned. They had never seen someone bypass their combined strike like that. I didn't give them time to recover. I stepped into the nearest rider's space and swung with everything I had. My blade crunched through his heavy armor like it was parchment. The man was thrown from his horse, his chest cavity collapsed. I didn't wait for him to stop moving. I stepped forward and finished the job. I drove my blade straight through the barbarian rider's face. The kill felt cold and mechanical. A notification flashed in my mind. Enemy slain. Attributes gained. 0.21. I realized then that these weren't ordinary soldiers. Their physical stats were far beyond the average barbarian infantry I'd encountered. But my sudden burst of violence had woken them up. The first row of riders held their line with spears, while the second row drew their heavy curved sabers, eyes locked on me. They swung in unison, a wall of steel coming for my head. I didn't panic. I leaped onto the back of the horse belonging to the man I'd just killed. From the saddle, I swung back, my rusty blade clashing against theirs. On the other side of the field, the Great Chin soldiers were struggling. The barbarian defense was like a fortress, almost impenetrable. But because I had carved a hole in their formation, a leak had started to spring. Deputy Chief Liu wasn't a genius, but he had enough military sense to spot an opening. He saw me, prisoner 9527, creating absolute chaos. Right wing. Everyone. Push toward 9527. Liu screamed. His order saved my life. My body was nearly 5 times stronger than a normal human's, but I wasn't invincible. Against a coordinated unit of elite cavalry, I was still just flesh and blood. One wrong move, and I'd be skewered. With Liu's men rushing in to back me up, the pressure eased. I finally had room to move. I went wild. I rode that horse like a demon, hacking at anything that crossed my path. If a dog had wandered in front of me, it would have lost its head. My strikes were heavy, pure, raw power. Barbarians were being knocked clean off their mounts with single blows. Some were lucky and died instantly. Others were crushed under hooves as the formation buckled. Wherever I went, I left a trail of screaming men and broken armor. Liu watched me from a distance, probably thanking whatever gods he believed in that he'd brought me along. Without me, this ambush would have been a suicide mission. Seeing the tide turn, he finally drew his own sword and charged into the fray. I was so caught up in the slaughter that I didn't notice I'd carved a path right through them. I blinked, realizing there was no one left in front of me. I'd charged clear out of the encirclement. I looked back and saw the barbarians I'd wounded being finished off by my own side. My heart ached. Those weren't just enemies. Those were my attribute points. Get back here, I growled, slamming my blade against the horse's flank. I wheeled around and dove back into the meat grinder. I got smarter this time. I didn't just swing wildly. I picked the ones who were already weakened, delivering the finishing blows to maximize my gains. The system's voice was like music in my ears. Enemy slain. Attribute plus 0.22. Enemy slain. Attribute plus 0.20. Enemy slain. Attribute plus 0.19. My power was climbing, but my luck was about to run out. My performance was too loud, too visible. The barbarian commander finally noticed me. At first, he probably thought I was just a lucky peasant. Now, seeing his elite riders falling like wheat, he knew better. He decided to handle me himself. I was busy harvesting points when a sudden chill raced down my spine. Die, a voice roared. The sound of rushing air hit the back of my head. I ducked instinctively. A blade hissed through the air, inches above my skull. Cold sweat broke out across my back. That was the closest I'd come to death since being reborn in this world. The commander didn't give me time to breathe. He swung a second time, faster than the first. I raised my blade to block, and the impact felt like a falling mountain. My invincible strength met its match. The force of the blow sent me flying off my horse, crashing into the dirt. "You're done, kid." The commander sneered, his face twisted in a predatory grin. He raised his saber for the execution. Clang. Before I could move, another sword intercepted the strike. Deputy Chief Liu had appeared out of nowhere. He glanced at me briefly before glaring at the barbarian. A Hoteon realm warrior picking on a commoner? Lu spat. A bit pathetic, don't you think, northern trash? Hoteon realm? The word triggered something deep in my mind. Memories I didn't know I had began to surface. I saw a younger version of myself, 7 years old. My father, the Earl of Anyuan, stood in a courtyard with a Taoist priest. In the memory, the priest was testing our potential for cultivation. My younger sister was tested first. Second-grade talent, the priest had said with a smile. She can practice. Then he tested my fiancée, a young girl named Yuer. The priest's face had changed then, turning from calm to utter shock. Top-tier talent, he whispered. A once-in-a-century genius. It's a pity she's a girl, or my temple would fight to have her. My father had asked what would happen to her. The priest assured him that while his temple didn't take women, there was a place called Yaoqi, the Jade Pool, that was perfect for her. The memory faded as quickly as it came. I shook my head, clearing the fog. My past life as a noble didn't matter right now. What mattered was the man standing over me. A Hoteon warrior. A real fighter. I looked at Lu and then at the barbarian commander. The commoner they were talking about was currently holding a blade and feeling a very familiar hunger for power. If this commander was a warrior, then his attribute points had to be worth a fortune. The memory of my 7-year-old self continued to play out like a vivid movie. After testing the girls, the priest turned his gaze toward me. My father nodded, asking him to check my potential as well. The Taoist placed his hand on my wrist, his expression shifting from curiosity to a heavy, complicated frown. He let go and let out a long, weary sigh. My father's face paled. He knew that look. He asked what was wrong, and the priest didn't sugarcoat it. He told my father that I was born with severed meridians. In this world, to practice martial arts, you need internal pathways for energy to flow. I had none. I was a cultivation dead end. My father took a deep breath and accepted it. He figured I'd just inherit his title and live a quiet, ordinary life as a nobleman. Shortly after that, my fiancée was taken away by a mysterious, ethereal woman to a place called the Jade Pool. My younger sister was scouted by another powerful master. I was the only one left behind. My parents stopped being strict with me, letting me run wild and free. That freedom eventually turned me into a spoiled brat, leading all the way to that drunken night that landed me in this death row camp. So, cultivation was real. These Hoteon warriors weren't just legends. They were the elite of this world. I felt a pang of unease. I had thought my system would make me invincible in a world of simple steel and muscle, but now I was facing people who could manipulate internal energy. Judging by the barbarian leader's speed, these warriors were dangerous. Even with 5 times the strength of a normal man, I was at a disadvantage. But the fear didn't last long. I had the system. Even if I could only pump my physical stats, I knew I could outgrow any genius cultivator. I just needed to stay steady and keep getting stronger. Back in reality, only a second had passed. Deputy Chief Lu lunged forward, his blade clashing against the barbarian leaders. They moved like shadows, a king against a king. Mad Windblade, the barbarian roared. His saber blurred, turning into a whirlwind of steel that whistled toward Lu's head. Each strike carried a sharp, invisible gust of wind, true internal energy. Lu didn't back down, his own blade flashing just as fast. Sparks flew everywhere as they collided, the sheer pressure of their fight forcing everyone else to stay back. Even with my enhanced body, I could feel the stinging pressure of their energy on my skin. Is that what Chi feels like? I wondered. I didn't have time to watch the show. I needed to get stronger, and I needed to do it now. I pulled up my mental interface. I didn't hesitate. I dumped every single point into my physique. Physique, 6.84. Available points, 0. A wave of intense heat surged through my veins. It was so much power at once that my skin turned a deep, angry red. My blood felt like it was boiling, and a terrifying strength began to coil in my muscles. I felt like I was going to explode if I didn't find an outlet for this energy. A barbarian scout saw me standing still and thought I was an easy target. He charged on his horse, swinging his saber at my neck. I moved before he could even blink. My blade flashed in a clean arc, shattering his armor like glass and splitting him open. Enemy killed. Attribute points gained, 0.24. That was just the start. I vaulted onto a stray horse, gripped my blade, and dove back into the thick of the fray. Without their leader to stop me, I was a god of death. I tore through the barbarian ranks, knocking men off their horses and cleaving through shields. With nearly 7 times the strength of a normal human, no one could stand in my way. Enemy killed. Points, 0.21. Enemy killed. Points, 0.18. Enemy killed. Points, 0.23. My momentum was infectious. The Great Shin soldiers, seeing me carve a path through the enemy, began to rally behind me. We broke their formation, turning the tide of the battle in minutes. The shift in the battlefield caught the attention of the 2 leaders. Lu looked ecstatic, while the barbarian leader's face turned black with rage. He couldn't understand how his elite scouts were being slaughtered by a bunch of prisoners. "It's over, barbarian." Lu laughed, parrying a blow. "Surrender now." "Never," the barbarian screamed. His aura suddenly spiked, his energy flaring out in a violent burst. Lu's eyes widened. "You bastard. You're breaking through mid-fight." The barbarian leader laughed manically as his power settled into a new, higher level. "The great god has blessed me. I have reached the 5th rank of Hodian." He turned his cold, murderous gaze on Lu. "Let's see you stop me now." His next strike was faster and heavier than anything before. There was a sickening crack as Lu's blade snapped in half. The barbarian's saber continued its downward arc, aimed straight for Lu's skull. Lu froze, staring at the cold steel of his impending death. Suddenly, a rusty blade slammed into the path of the barbarian's weapon, blocking it cold. I grabbed Lu by the collar and yanked him back out of range. "Who is this?" the barbarian roared, his eyes bloodshot with fury. When he realized it was me, the man who had been ruining his army, his rage hit a breaking point. I looked at Lu and gave him a small, calm smile. "Deputy Chief, you saved me once. Now I've saved you. We're even." Lu let out a ragged laugh. "Not even close. You had a chance to dodge back then. I was just dead meat. I owe you one." He glanced at the barbarian, who looked like a demon possessed. "But if you want me to pay you back, we have to deal with this monster first." I stepped forward, my grip tightening on my blade. "Leave him to me." Lu blinked, stunned. "To you?"